Thank you for those who are here today. Before we start, we just would like to acknowledge the Piramak people, the active and living custodians of these lands, these unceded lands, and also acknowledge the plants, the animals that have moved through these lands and have also been custodians, building our soils, cleaning our air and our waters. So today we are Permaculture for Refugees, but we only have a small group of us here, considering the wide network that Permaculture for Refugees is. So here today we have Greta, Carroll, Rowe, Morrow. We have Eunice, Rob, and Detta, and myself, Sarah. And today we're also going to have some voices joining us today that aren't present on the screen. So we're going to have Trudy calling in from Gubbi Gubbi country, and we're also going to have the voices from East Africa and Habiba from Europe joining us as well. And we're going to be sharing a story. Well, a few stories, in fact. Stories that weave together the themes that have been emerging during this conference already, this Convergence. Themes such as expressing the expressions of active hope, of valuing the edges and diversity, the give-give relationships between groups holding different forms of capital. We've talked about gumption, and you'll see that resonate through our presentation today. But before we start, P4R uses the term refugee to refer to anyone who has experienced displacement, including asylum seekers and internally displaced people. Greta.
Thanks, Sarah. I also want to acknowledge it's the last day of the Convergence. Both Sarah and I have been engaged in so much conversation that our voices are gone. So I'm sorry for that. And also name that I feel much more comfortable sitting in a circle under a tree and talking and not in front of a wall of people, but we're here. So as Sarah mentioned today, we're sharing stories, and we're actually sharing other people's stories, and we do that with great care. We choose to share stories that we're given permission to share, and we only are sharing the information that we feel is relevant for this dialogue, and using images and videos where we feel it's useful to add to the understanding of complexity and the scale of the context that a lot of displacement settings hold. Also, often narratives around people who've been displaced, I personally feel quite strongly about this, the framing of the narrative strips people of agency and of dignity. And so we are consciously very deliberate in our choice of words. And hopefully by the end of this session, you will all also agree that people who've experienced displacement are actually some of the most resilient, creative problem solvers, resourceful and adaptive members of our community. And as a permaculture movement, their experiences and their knowledge actually strengthens all of us. So, in saying that, we're going to start with a story, and the overall story of Permaculture for Refugees started with quite a young 75-year-old who had an idea, who had a seed and planted that seed. And for me personally, the sowing of seeds is the... Sorry, did you want to say something? Thank you so much. I'll wait till we move. You right there, mate? So we heard about the practice of active hope yesterday. Was that just yesterday? Oh my gosh. 3 years ago, yesterday. an amazing group of people discussed the practice of active hope, and for me, sowing seeds is a pretty quintessential expression of active hope. To sow a seed means that you believe that someone will be there to, or someone else to harvest and to replant those seeds in the future. So this young 75-year-old planted a seed, and it germinated, and it set fruit, and it set seed, and those seeds travelled really far and really fast through the wind and the water and the interweb, and started to hybridize natural. Oh, you're shaking. Oh, would you like a chair? Okay. Started to adapt. They started to be locally adapted, and they were embraced by communities, and people made them their own. And this seed that was sown has turned into something much greater and much more responsive and powerful than that person ever imagined. So I'm going to invite that person to the microphone, if you can make it, over here. And that person's Rowe Morrow.
Thank you very much, everyone. About 6 years ago, I was young and 75 years old, and I was quite a baby. And I was invited by World Vision to a refugee camp in Iraq of 50,000 people pushed out of Syria. It was a moment of urgency for Syria. They wanted to teach permaculture. So off we went. The bombers were flying out of Erbil, and they were bombing the towns around there, and every day we went across the Tigris Euphrates. The end of that, it was the European Permaculture Convergence. So I got there and thought, this is working. Permaculture for some refugee camps. Let's call a meeting and see if there's interest. So we went to a little upstairs room, and I lay down because I was old and tired. And Antonio and John and Francesca and Ruth, and who else? Marguerite from Italy, all came to the meeting, and we said, let's start permaculture for refugees, with the aim that refugees would take it over. So, you have to have a purpose, you have to have a mission, you have to have objectives. You know all that, or you can't do anything. But we didn't have any. So we said, let's work to turn every refugee settlement in the world, anywhere, into an ecological settlement. So 5 people from 5 different countries said, let's do this. We had no idea at all and no real plan. So we talked and we carried on. We had no money. We still don't. We've got a bit of a plan now, but not really. So they said to me, we better get proof of concept. We better find out that it works for people everywhere. Big camps, little camps. Rohingya from the wet monsoon, people in the desert, people coming from Afghanistan, people from the Sudan, all the displaced people in the world. We will have Buddhists and Christian Orthodox and Muslims, and we must know it works for everyone or it works for no one. They said, good idea, let's do that. So I think that is what Hannah meant by thinking big. We did not know what we were doing, and so we muddled along. I got the money somehow. Quakers quite good at giving money to hopeless causes and risky situations. And we were in Rohingya, in Lesbos, in Greece, in Turkey, in Iraq, in Srinagar, which is a desperately sad occupied country. And then we had the evidence. Now, it was different because we said, let's include local residents where there are any. what a mad idea, because this is for refugees. Then we said, let's make sure the local NGO is learning. They can't just manage, they have to be in the class. And then, of course, you build your community. Interesting thing about this was, we hadn't prepared this. In COVID, when the NGOs pulled out, the local people said, come here and work with us, especially in Greece where there were 2 huge fires, and also on the border of Myanmar and Bangladesh. The people who were local, who knew them, were able to support people. It wasn't a happy time, but in an emergency, it was that local community again, and the community built. Well, then, you see, we didn't really have an organisation, so we spent weeks discussing objectives and outcomes and outputs, and we couldn't get anywhere, and we got lost, went round in circles. We had Nice in the background supporting all the project and doing the money and bringing order, and she got to know some of the Afghans as well. And then we had other people, but really pretty hopeless group. I think the wisdom, remember, all elders are wise except me, so all the wisdom coming out of this is don't trust your pioneers to run things, because you need consolidators who come behind and can do it. So we were so lucky. We found this wonderful, wonderful woman who we'd love to have with us today, and we invited her, Trudy Jurians. Anyone know Trudy? Yeah, terrific. She ran the Eco Village Network through the whole South Pacific for crisis and floods and sea rise. She's a Permie. And Sarah gave us her name because we had taught a course with Sarah in the Philippines, not this one. We're starting to network now. So Rob, we had Sarah in the Philippines who knew Trudy in Brisbane, who got us off the thing. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it was really. Is that what you're doing? Oh, I better sit down again. But that is the beginning of the story and how it was all happening. Yeah. So Trudy's one of those wonder people like you. And the whole thing acquired a life of its own, and it's all escaped. It's beyond control. Whatever we do or don't do, this project will go on because we can't manage it. And that's very sad for a Westerner.
Hi everyone, I think that's my cue to say something.
Trudy,
Is that right?
Can you hear anyone?
You can hear me? I hope. Can I get just a little something to say that you can hear me?
Trudy came now because you can only have one.
Can't hear me? I can hear you. I can hear you. Can you hear me? Test. Hello. I can hear you, but you can't hear me. Yeah. Hi, it's Trudy. Testing. Hello. Can you hear me? No? Okay. Can you hear me? Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? No? I don't think you can hear me yet, right? You can just say something if you can hear me. No. No, you can't hear me. That's all right. Maybe it's just meant to be that you see my face. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? You can hear me. Yay, great. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's strange because I can hear you, but I guess it's just the two-way. There's no two-way conversation, but it's great to be here, zooming in, and maybe I'll just say a few words and then you can carry on with the session. But just continuing on with the story of P4R, the seeds of P4R were planted, and I came in, and I feel like my role was really just to come in and add some water and to add fertilizer to the soil, because the soil was already rich and so much was already happening. And I heard a little bit of what Greta was sharing, and I think that was basically what I came in and did, was seeing P4R from a bigger perspective, and seeing the importance of the network and all of the seeds on the ground and the projects on the ground, and the importance of permaculture in refugee camps and supporting refugees. And for a network to function, it also needs another system, to help support it, so that it can continue to function and grow. And that's what I came in and was able to do, was be able to say, okay, so we have a network, let's create a team, and build some systems that can be reliable, so that it can keep continuing to grow, and function, and blossoming, into these projects that can really support the work in these countries. So yeah, the networking meetings were really important, just being able to connect, and not just for the P4R team to connect with people in camps and in various regions, but also for people to be able to connect with each other. Because when you bring people together from diverse backgrounds and from different situations, there's a lot of cross-pollination can happen, and through that cross-pollination, ideas and so many amazing things can spring out. So those networking meetings became quite an important part of P4R. And then, of course, having a team that were able to do some specific critical functions, like communications, being able to coordinate the network, and finance and admin. And that's what the little team is. And then beyond that team, there's an extended group of like trainers, and other networkers like Greta and Sarah, and the founders, the pioneers of P4R, that kind of continue to hold and act as a council to guide P4R as a network and organization to go forward. And Greta will go deeper into some of that, but the three areas, the regions were Europe, Asia Pacific, and Africa, East Africa. And my role, I've stepped out of this role of kind of fertilizing, and I'm kind of a little bit now in the back end, helping to set up the incorporated association, a registered legal entity that can enable P4R to kind of accept donations and help to continue the work that's happening. And the next step is obviously to open a bank account, which we're in process to do with Bank Australia. So I'm just kind of this little, maybe a fairy in the background, helping to continue to pollinate or fertilize from afar, but still very much a fan and very much a part of the network, and in admiration of the work that's happening with the projects on the ground and with Sarah, Greta, Rowe, and the others. And I'll stop there and pass it back to you. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. So, a group of us, Sundus, Evan, and I, took on the work that Trudy started before us, and I am the communication coordinator, which is a fancy way of saying that I am responsible for Permaculture for Refugees social media. Then we have Evan, who is originally from America, now based in Italy, and he is the global coordinator, and he basically holds the network together. And then we have Sundus. Sundus is amazing. She's the networking and admin coordinator, and she is originally from Yemen, and she spent 8 years as a displaced person in Malaysia, where she was involved with the Blue Ribbon, which is one of our partners. And there she was the project manager of students, refugee students and locals in projects involved with climate action. And the three of us basically are running P4R from the background. So we do networking work, we collect funds, we send out newsletters, we basically keep in touch with all of you. And amazing things that have happened this year are us partnering up with 12 Principles Permaculture, and we've collected funds for 16 scholarships for refugees and migrants to attend a permaculture teacher training with a focus on refugees and migrants. And we also are now in touch with permaculturists in Turkey, and we are supporting them with emergency designs for the recovery period after the, after the earthquakes, thank you. And there is an idea of eventually getting a lot of people interested, permaculturists, to go into camps in Turkey and organize perma-blitzes to implement designs. Thank you. I'll now pass on to Greta.
Thank you so much. I'm going to see if this clicker works. Oh. Well, there's our seeds. On that note, Detta, I also want to shout out Milkwood because you offer positions for members of the Permaculture for Refugees network free to do your online courses, and that's been such a huge, huge support. So thank you for bringing that up. Thanks, Kirsten and Nick. All right, I'm hearing 15 or more places, so thank you. And I have, friends who are like, I've been trained by Milkwood Academy of Permaculture. I'm like, yeah. So this is a few of the places where our network members are and where we're working. And as Permaculture for Refugees, when we say we mean a big we. Like, I don't mean people that look like us or are here in the room. We as a disintegrative pattern, a network, is as a we. And I'm sharing some of the sort of key stories, the most exciting things for us, and how, and what it looks like when the edge is valued and the edge is supported, and how that will feed back into mainstream permaculture practice. So this is an organization in the Philippines called Green Relief, which until recently has been headed up by an amazing human being called Sarah Quebleton. And the Philippines experiences a number of natural disasters and recently conflict as well. And Green Relief's mission is to train first responders in permaculture training so that in the immediate moments after a disaster of any kind, we've got emergency gardens, we've got cleaning water capacity, we've got meals being prepared, and water and sanitation infrastructure being put in a way that doesn't harm the planet, because that's a really big thing in the international humanitarian response movement is like people come first and planet come like so far behind. So their work is incredible. They identify community leaders and they work with them they deliver the training themselves. And we'll come back to another example of where refugee camps and response is changing, but this is an example of where people themselves, communities, are mobilising to strengthen their response, which is awesome. Because if you've ever been in a disaster, it's the communities that respond first, and it's communities that will be there at the end. So this is some snapshots from a course we ran in Malaysia in 2019, about 8 months before global lockdown stopped people moving. This is Tony in the middle. Tony was teaching from like the first day. He was in the back of the class writing out designs, implementing things. He is originally from Myanmar and was forced across the border because of his religion and ethnicity. Part of that course we put in a garden. We sowed seeds literally, and during COVID, when people didn't have access to food and couldn't leave their homes, that seed bank became, or that seed garden became a bank that Blue Ribbon Group in Malaysia used, and they shared compost, they shared soil, they shared seeds, and they distributed among youth and refugee populations, which we never imagined that.
All that list of things there came out of one 18-day PDC. Just what one PDC can deliver.
Yeah, Narani is an amazing community mobiliser and networker, and Sundus, who we referred to earlier, I think is on the next page. Sundus joined in with this Blue Ribbon Group and got into permaculture that way. So those of us who were there teaching that course in Malaysia have never actually met Sundus in person. She just came in and immediately was like, what resources do you have for my community back in Yemen? How can I teach my community back in Yemen online? We were like, whoa, okay, cool. What are you thinking? And straight away was an emergency food gardens booklet. So Permaculture for Refugees has started branching out. We now have an emergency first aid for low resource settings, which has been translated into Dari and is being circulated throughout Afghanistan, and also Pakistan, which has a similar context and climate and has recently experienced some really devastating floods. So Sundus moved from Yemen to Malaysia, was then resettled in Canada, is now awesome and connected with the permaculture community in Canada, and is teaching back in Yemen. Seeds that we never saw. Similarly, this amazing couple, Qasim and Zaguna, who, if you stick around after the break, Eunice Nevesh over there with the red socks, remember that name, remember that face. She will go into a lot more detail about the wider permaculture-informed Global First refugee resettlement design program that she organised and did. But Qasim and Zaguna are from an area called Bamiyan in Afghanistan, and they were forced to leave. They were teaching permaculture in Bamiyan. They were forced to leave and move to Kabul city when the countryside became unsafe. They were teaching then in schools in Kabul, and Rowe, Morrow is a big part of that journey. When Kabul fell to the Taliban in August of 2021, a lot of people were displaced, we know that, but the group that they were a part of, which was a Hazara Shia ethnic religious minority group who's been actively targeted by the Taliban, they're a group of peace volunteers, and they also had to leave. So they spent time in Pakistan, and recently, thanks to the work of some incredible people in this room, were resettled in Portugal, where they're now teaching in schools permaculture in Portugal. You're like, what? Didn't see that one coming, did you, Rowe? I also want to mention no one that I've ever met, and I've only been working in displacement context for about 10 years, so like not ages, but no one who's been displaced ever imagined that they would be displaced. And so part of our work in terms of focusing on education is giving people the thinking, the tools and the knowledge that they can carry with them wherever they go. And that's the feedback that we get in camps all the time, is like, that NGO is giving me a bucket, but I can't take that bucket with me. What I can take with me is the understanding of systems and the knowledge and the skills that I can rebuild wherever I go next. So the next is a video, which is from, sorry, I'm going fast. It's all really, really exciting to me. This is Habiba, and Habiba is part of, she's going to
My
explain.
name is Habiba. I live in Spain. I am originally from Beirut, Lebanon. My participation today will be about sharing the experience of a course we did last November in Catalonia, Spain, training of permaculture teacher with a special focus on refugees. The TPT is a curriculum developed by Morrow and collaborators and designed to transmit ways, information, and knowledge to train people on how to teach permaculture. This particular course I will talk about has a special focus on integrating the refugee aspect into the curriculum. I facilitated this course with Alfred Decker, who was the lead facilitator and lives in Vidalia, Catalonia. Also with Yao Fan and Sonita Mba from Hong Kong and from Cameroon. Sonita herself is a refugee in Germany. Alfred is originally from the USA. I am mentioning a lot where we come from because it was one of our strengths as a facilitation team. We have brought different perspectives and experiences into the facilitation and the teaching. The participants were also very diverse. This course was made possible thanks to a crowdfunding campaign, and we were able to fund the participation of 10 people, forced migrants, or with a refugee status, and many of those refugees are currently in Europe. For example, we have Amin from Afghanistan, who traveled and fought for several years throughout Syria, Turkey, and Greece before being able to have his legal papers in Greece. We have Malcolm and Konkanku, who flew from Cameroon and now are living in Portugal and creating an initiative called the African Way there. We have 4 women from Ukraine who had to flee the war and are now between Denmark and Holland, welcomed by the eco-village there. We have 2 people from Gambia who are now living in southern Spain and are collaborating with an initiative called La Bolina. Other participants were from Europe and were interested in learning about new culture and how to work in a refugee context. We are now planning a second edition of the course at the end of May with the same facilitation team, and we are expecting other people with a refugee status to be able to participate. The course is fundamentally inspired and based on the TPT developed by Rosemary, as mentioned before. In this past edition, we added 1 day and called it Focus on Refugee Day. During this day, we included several activities and dynamics to be able to collect the richness of the group and of the context we were all living together. On Refugee Day, we used some techniques like the River of Life, so people will get to know each other and know the different stories of their lives that led them to come to this course. This was an amazing opportunity to listen and visualize what other people have lived and why they are interested in permaculture. Many of the sessions this day were also facilitated by the refugees, and many people made presentations about their work. We also had the evening sessions for that. Now in the upcoming course, we will distribute the session throughout the course, so we won't have a refugee day, but the whole course will integrate the different sessions on this specific topic. Also, we noticed that the group was very diverse, that it took some time for people to bond and create harmony among the group. So this time we will begin with the team building dynamics and sharing activities earlier in the course to create this atmosphere of closeness that usually happened during such intensive courses. What was special about this course is that throughout the days, the testimony came from people with diverse perspective on permaculture. A lot of emphasis was given on the importance of building a community and integrating spirituality into all initiatives. This was especially emphasized by the people from Africa. The Ukrainian team showed us the resilience that permaculture initiatives can have in the happening of a war, where those permaculture initiatives are producing food for the displaced and welcoming people throughout their path to a more secure place. We also had the opportunity to listen to Ushyar, who shared how teaching permaculture should be adapted to the local traditions and way of doing things in Kurdistan, Iraq. Permaculture, in its mission to integrate us as a human in our surrounding habitat in a respectful but also intelligent and proactive way, has a lot to offer in a refugee context, where people are unrooted by force and are not given the choice and are unrooted from their normal surrounding, and most of the time arriving to places where the basic human needs are hard to be met, like food, water, shelter, sanitation, energy, and community, to name a few. They become completely dependent on their environment and their understanding of it. Through TPT for refugees, we hope to create the space where people can meet, learn, and participate in the continual improvement of our response as a community of change and hope to the unnecessary ordeals imposed on humanity by political and economical forces. Thank you very much for your attention. I wish you have a very interesting and good time in this permaculture convergence. Thank you very much.
It's extremely rare to bring together refugees from something like
A southern for my soul in the world of permaculture.
and all learn permaculture. So that's been regionally organised by European and the Middle East, and they've got another one happening in September looking for sponsorships for refugees. But we are out of the organisation completely. It's running away all by itself in situations like this. There's another one in Lesbos with a farm doing, it's all too much to think about really for an old brain.
Thanks, Rowe. Yeah, it's so exciting that we have people adapting a course that many of us in the room have done to support refugees teach themselves, teach their own communities, because as Rowe said, it's not something, that's not a role that we particularly want to hold for a very long time. It's not our place. We really want to go to a bit of a discussion. So Tim, we're actually going to skip the next video, and if anyone's interested in Morrow Gamble's work in East Africa, she's coming in the next session as well. So the next session is such an epic day. We have Eunice, we have PermaFund, 10 years of PermaFund, and we also have Morag speaking about her work the work that's happening in East Africa. She'll say, it's not my work, and it's true. She's a huge part of that, but
There are these two exciting initiatives are starting a new settlement model for refugees, which is quite extraordinary based on permaculture principles, and the way Morag uses technology to teach into camps and the way that spreads. It is brilliant, and it would be good if we knew about it.
Greta spoke earlier about what happened after the earthquake in Turkey, so we're not going to touch on it right now, but in very, very, very short, Turkey Permaculture organisations contacted Rowe 5 a.m. in the morning. What do? She put them in touch with people who were in Europe, and permaculture organisations started emergency gardens, first aid, doing designs, helping people rebuild, helping members of the community rebuild. So really exciting stuff. The last place that we want to share some story about is a refugee camp on the border of Bangladesh and Myanmar, where 1 million Rohingya refugees were forced to move to because of ethnic cleansing. And we're gonna I'm gonna show a little video to understand the scale and the complexity of the camp, because I think it's something that most of us in the room, and I'm making an assumption there, could struggle to contextualize. Thanks so much, Tim. The work that's happening through an organisation called Bangladesh Association for Sustainable Development, or BASD, is incredible. They have been running courses in the camp as well as in the community around the camp. It's a really interesting context because, I don't know, I think Tim is working on the film. I don't know, over 20 different camps. And I'm sorry, Tim. It's my fault. I'm changing the order so we can get through it all. Bangladesh. So this is the drone footage. This was all elephant habitat. This was an acacia woodland, and when people were forced in there, they didn't have building supplies, they didn't have fuel, and of course the timber became very valuable, and unfortunately a lot of the forest was lost. And yeah, awesome, thanks. So permaculture solutions in a context like that, exciting. This is a bit weird, we don't have to watch that bit. We can cut that. We're gonna skip over, next one. There we go, okay. So through the Permaculture for Refugees network, two PDCs were run in the camp in 2018. And what that saw was that the involvement of NGO staff that work in the camp is critical, because they're the people, unfortunately, that make a lot of decisions. So BASD is now working, that's cool, on training NGO staff that work in the camp alongside refugees, so that there's more of a comprehensive application of permaculture in the camp. We travelled there in December, and we ran a teacher training course for BASD staff, and identified some epic educators who would love to keep teaching that course on our behalf. And then we ran a PDC for NGO workers who are currently working in the camp, as well as community leaders. And then we were also co-teaching with BASD trainers in the camp. And I put this picture here because for me, this is showing that the solutions that people are using and designing, the techniques that are working in really crowded settlements, can be also used in feedback to our urban permaculture practices as well. Again, as I said, incredibly creative and resourceful. There's lots of animals, so you can't just have a garden around because it'll get lost. Roofs, incredibly valuable. Walls, incredibly valuable. The little spot behind the toilet, incredibly valuable. We've got a mango tree, a papaya, there's garlic, onions, there's a melon, there's beans, all in maybe a square metre. So the way we utilise space in Australia, we could learn a lot. But what's really exciting, and this is something that I get really excited about, is that because of the work where we're seeing permaculture expanding and being adopted and being embraced to find solutions in lots and lots of different contexts that don't look like one family living on a few acres in the subtropics, we're getting more and more content that's relevant in many different places. So Rob, our amazing illustrator over in the corner here, Rob is a brilliant teacher using illustration, and working with Rowe, I don't even have a copy of your book, it's out there on the Meliadora stand. Earth Restorer's Guide to Permaculture is now equipped with lots and lots of content and illustrations that are bridging the gap between the majority of the world's lifestyle and livelihoods and context and the minority of the world. And we're looking at how practices in what we call like the crowded edges can inform urban design, which is so exciting. Similarly, what happens when your zone 1 is not at your back door? What happens when your zone 2 is not out past your lemon tree? How do we design for camps? How do we design for communities? That's all being fed back through crowded settlements. And that's really exciting for everyone. And similarly, and this was a very moving and I don't want to say exciting anymore, moving experience for me. This diagram or illustration here on the right-hand side is a landscape in an arid climate. So it is from Afghanistan. And at a PDC in Portugal, where people from Afghanistan had been resettled, someone, Rahim, amazing dude, jumped up and went, I can teach that, and stood and taught dry land water management techniques and strategies to people in Portugal whose climate is increasingly drying as the Sahara Desert moves further north. And it was like a what moment of collaboration and cross-pollination, and the strengthening of the permaculture movement when we include resources and content for people that don't necessarily look like this. That made it in. I think we might skip the next ones, but we're looking here at propagation techniques, and there's another story, but I'm going to skip over it. Sorry. This is a group of NGO workers making their base map in the camp, and Shiraj here on the right-hand side is a camp resident, and he's helping co-design a design for a camp area in Camp 19.
I know it's clear, but we don't design for anyone. We teach people to design. So when someone says to me, why don't you go and design something, I think, you have to teach people design.
Okay, I'm going to skip the next story because it's for another time. We don't have that time right now. But Eunice said this very beautifully yesterday, that seeds spread and they germinate where they're needed. They fill a social and an ecological niche. And permaculture for refugees and what has spread and what has been locally adapted and embraced and hybridized is such a beautiful example of that for me. We had, and all of those, hopefully all of those stories demonstrate that for you too. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah now, because this voice is...
Thanks, Greta. So now we'd like to invite you all to think about your homes. Just think about your home and what situations might make it so unbearable that you have to leave, that you would have to leave. In this world today, we can no longer distance ourselves from the experiences of other people experiencing displacement, because it's becoming more and more a reality for more and more people. And so I'd invite you to share with the person next to you what would make it so unbearable that you had to leave at short notice and potentially never return, and what would you take with you in a bag that size? And you have 2 hours. So I invite you to share with the person next to you, and then we have another question after that. We'll give you 2 minutes.
Guys, we don't have 2 minutes. We have 10 minutes left of the whole session.
That's all right. We can take
Can
some
you give
questions.
people a warning? I'm about to turn the lights on.
Yeah, we're just going to turn the lights on in case it's a bit bright. I was going to explain.
Oh, that's okay. No. And you have 1 more minute to share. Okay, we're just going to stop you there because we have another really important question that we feel is more important. And I invite you just to merge your groups so your groups are slightly bigger, 4 or 5 people. And the question is, how can permaculture adapt and grow based on these experiences? How do these experiences of displacement, of people experiencing displacement, how do they inform permaculture? How can they strengthen permaculture? Does that make sense? So how can the experience of people experiencing displacement inform or adapt permaculture? Just one more minute. Okay, everyone, I'm sorry, we're going to have to stop there because we want to give you time to ask questions, particularly for Rowe. So can I just have one or two examples from a group that would like to share? How can permaculture be strengthened from these experiences? What have we learned? Yes.
That you don't need space to be able to apply the permaculture principles, so that can be transferred to here, you know, your little balcony on a high-rise building or that sort of thing. And probably the other one was about water capture, including in those sorts of spaces, that's so vital to actually have access to water.
Beautiful, thank you. Anyone else would like to share? One more? Yes.
Creating connection and community.
Yeah, thank you. And across the world as well. Amazing connections, networks. Okay, well, I'm sorry to wrap that one, but hopefully you can keep thinking about it and having those discussions outside. But we would love to open up to questions for our last 5 minutes. Is that a question? No? Yeah.
Hi. Thank you so much thank you for the presentation. Just want to ask you, like when you think about Australia and how it's going to be Australia prepared for what is coming, like more and more climate disasters are happening here, but also a lot of the Pacific Islands are relying on Australian help. And being permaculture an Australian with Australian origins, how you see that? Is there any like support from developers or like interest or what's going on in that way in Australia?
Give it to me again. Okay, I think what we've seen today, in some things Australia's behind. If you went to the Philippines, they're way ahead of us in disaster preparation. So is Bangladesh for floods and ocean rise. And so we're behind. But on the other hand, Australians' permaculture has a very high reputation for very good content and often good delivery and good relevance. So it can kick off something that becomes their own. I think that Southeast Asia Refugee Group, because of its network, is best placed, and Trudy in particular, to create that network of support. But some places will have to move. And you can't say just be hopeful, because I worked with Solomon Island lagoon dwellers, and they said we won't move, our ancestors are buried, and now they're saying we have applied to the government for land. We must move, we cannot stay. So if possible, it's getting proactive. Australian permaculture could play a big role in that. And of course, you know, there are a lot of people with contacts like Russ Grayson, with contacts in many of the islands, but it's a kick-off. It's opening the door and then walking away when people are doing what they need to do without trying to direct.
Another question?
Some fantastic stories about what's happening overseas, and I'm just wondering, is there work that can be done in Australia for refugees that are finding their way in this direction?
Really good question. It's something we've been discussing as a network ourselves. Did you want to?
Oh, you're welcome to. I just wanted to say thank you, because that was our next question if we had time. Because what the story is happening in all of the places that we've talked about is that people in communities are supporting other people in communities. And Australia is kind of the missing link in that. There's a lot of people in Australia who have come from overseas, you know, look around the room. But what can we do in our communities to support migrants? So Linda Woodrow at the moment, I don't know if you're in the room, Linda, but is working in Coffs Harbour building community gardens. I used to run a farm down near Geelong, and we did a food knowledge program and also like a paid employment work experience for resettled I don't hate the word refugee, sorry. People, they're people, everyone's a person. But my only thing, and I think my biggest takeaway in working in those spaces is and it's what we all try and do, is to meet people where they're at with the skills and the knowledge and the experience that they have, and not walk in with all the answers and be like, listen to me because I'm going to help you and you have to do it my way, because that's not really embracing diversity and diverse ways of being, knowing, doing. Thank you, Tiani, going to use that in the future. But yeah, really listening, hearing where people are at, and then helping them find solutions to what their pressing needs are.
In Darwin, some years ago, permaculturists helped start a very diverse community garden with people from Myanmar. So, I mean, that was really quite a big thing. We're going to have more and more people come to live here, and that is inevitable, and it's wonderful. So what we're going to get is all that value of people who have got something to offer us, and we have to think what we've got to offer them. Wouldn't be surprised if Jackie there had an idea, or Kirsten's nodding away. I think probably something's fermenting in some heads round here about what you can do. Yes, so if you take Cambodia, that was flattened after the war, and 2 million dead, and that civil war, people were as thin as sticks, and they were starving, literally starving, and there were piles of bodies and dogs and rats, and the most important thing was not really design, it was get food happening fast, particularly for women and children, and that was a skill that you sort of learn at that moment. Now, the other thing is, almost every country in the world, people can eat their indigenous plants. South America, potatoes, corn. You go to Africa, they've got all their tubers, they've got all their trees. Come to Australia, and if I put all of you out in the bush and said, eat, remember what Egos said this morning? The security's in the bush. It's not for us unless we're literate and eco-literate with what we can do in Australia, and we're not. You know, people might know you can eat that berry or this yam, but we cannot see our forests as a source of supermarket because of the colonial thing brought in so many that all the potential that was there, which might have been bred and crossbred, we are a rare country in the world that doesn't have its own food stores in its forests that it can draw on and use and develop and feed a nation. And that means we distorted the landscape. Sheep, ryegrass, clover, cabbages, lettuce. It doesn't matter we bring stuff in, but it does matter that we don't really understand the ecology. We're pretty ecologically illiterate, although we might love the botany and the grevillea and the birds eating it. We don't understand it as a food source. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to really quickly add to that. Sorry, John. Is that, what was I saying? At no point in a course are you ever like, you should plant this here and you should plant that there. It's like, what are your favorite things to grow? When do they, how do they grow? When do you harvest them? How much space do they need? What are their water requirements? And people design based on their own knowledge and their own food. And no one, hopefully, is ever recommending to plant an iceberg lettuce in the tropics, because that's something only colonial Australians would do. But yeah, I'd love to talk to you more about that, because our other growing edge is that balance between emergency need and long-term thinking, and how do you teach principles and design through techniques, because the techniques are often, that's what people want straight away. What can I do now? Right. Was that Green Connect? Thank you.
Aaron up in the chai tent works in a school with a lot of refugee children in high school, and their gardens are fantastic. And that's at Port Kembla. It's an absolute dream of integrating children and permaculture. Go and talk to Aaron.